Good evening and thank you for joining this live Tenant Farmers Association webinar, how the National Trust engaging with its tenant farmers to deliver strategy for people and nature to thrive. I am Robert Martin, the Tenant Farmers Association's National Chair. Tonight we'll be hearing from two prominent representatives from the National Trust, Giles Hunt and Richard Wheeldon. They will explain the work being undertaken by the National Trust with its farm tenants and understanding the dynamics around the farm by farm management of carbon in the context of the farmed landscape. While we're waiting for people to join us, I would like to thank our sponsors this evening, Roythorne Solicitors, being long-term supporters of the TFA. For those that don't know, Roythorne's is a national law firm steeped in agriculture. They have 90 years experience advising landowners and tenants alike. Their lawyers are active in farm tenancy policy groups. They get the bigger picture. So whether it's a succession application under the Agricultural Holdings Act, a new farm business tenancy, a dispute with your landlord, or a share farming agreement, or a collaborative nature capital agreement, Roythorne's is there to advise and assist. Before we begin this evening's proceedings, I'd like to cover off on a few housekeeping points. This webinar will be recorded. Once edited, it will be available via the on demand via the TFA YouTube channel. It will sit along other library events over the past period of time, short teaching, knowledge shares, and key news snippets. To find us, search at Tenant Farmers, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. You'll be notified when we will be publishing all our new content. This evening, we will also have a live question and answer in the final 25 minutes of the event. This is a chance for you to put your questions or share feedback live. When you use, please use the question and answer panel at the bottom of the screen and not the chat. So if I can move on to this evening's event, I'd like to give you some background before we start. In its 2025 and 2035 strategy, the National Trust pledges to support its tenant farmers to be bigger players in nature recovery and climate resilience while producing good, healthy food alongside running sustainable businesses. The strategy also recognises that a healthy natural environment underpins human health, including food production, and undertakes even bigger and stronger partnerships with farmers, community organisation and leaders to improve practice and policy for nature-friendly farming. Tonight, our guest speakers will talk us through how the Trust is delivering strategy in practice and how it tries to balance its state management responsibilities as a landlord and its wider responsibilities for nature, public access and the historic environment in which those farms sit. So I'd like to firstly introduce our two speakers for this evening. First, we will have Giles Hunt. Giles is Land and Estates Director for the National Trust with strategic responsibilities for an estate over 250,000 hectares and around 10,000 tenants, and including 5,000 domestic houses and 1,500 farms, as well as maintenance, repair and renovation of 29,000 buildings. A qualified rural practice chartered surveyor, he has held a range of leadership roles within the National Trust and took up his current position in 2017. Giles is active within his profession, having served as an APC examiner and as a member of various RICS boards and committees, and he currently sits on the CAAV Property Committee. Following Giles, we'll also hear from Richard Wheeldon. Richard is a farming for nature delivery manager at the National Trust. He works along the across the Trust farming estate on farming nature recovery and land use alongside tenants and colleagues. His role focuses on habitat restoration, climate resilience, and the development of sustainable nature-friendly farming systems. So that's the introductions for our two speakers this evening. So it's my pleasure to hand over to you, Giles. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, and thank you for inviting me to speak this evening. So the National Trust's new 10-year strategy is called People and Nature Thriving. It's got several planks to that strategy, the first of which is Restore Nature on National Trust land and beyond, working with others at scale to create 250,000 hectares of nature-rich land by 2035. And we'll do this by working beyond National Trust boundaries. And to do that, we'll do it in partnership with others. The second plank of our strategy is to end unequal access to nature, beauty, and history, and making sure that everybody can benefit from the places that we look after. Thirdly, we need to inspire millions to ensure that they wish to care and take action for all of the beautiful places that we have, as well as the places in their local communities, building wider public support and engagement with a diverse range of communities. For me, the most important thing about the title is that it starts with people. Everything we do through this strategy is grounded in people, and that means farming families, rural businesses, and the communities who are living and working in these landscapes day in and day out. Now, the strategy is also very clear about the role of farming in all of this. Nature-friendly farming is not sitting alongside it. It's absolutely central to the strategy, because nature-friendly farming delivers multiple things all at once: nature and biodiversity, clean water, clean air, healthy food production, and access to nature. And those aren't just nice to haves, they're fundamental to the long-term future of our countryside. And the other thing that the strategy is very explicit about is how we approach all of this. This has to start with open discussions. So what we're trying to do here isn't to land a policy or a set of instructions on farmers and our tenants. It's to create better conversations about how we keep both farm businesses and the landscapes they manage resilient for the future. Next slide, please. The strategy recognises through our climate transition programme and the Restore Nature that climate change and nature decline are no longer abstract issues. They are very real, practical issues for farming and for wider society. Hotter summers, heavier downpours, droughts, low river flows are becoming a world that we have to adapt to. In the last few weeks, we've seen temperatures jumping from near freezing to over 30 degrees, seeing the hottest May that we've had for many years. And those conditions have a direct impact on farming businesses. They affect yields, grass growth, stock management, and ultimately the resilience of our whole farming system. What the new strategy is absolutely clear about is that we need to work much quicker to respond to that. And this includes how we think about species, habitats, and the wider natural and cultural features of our land. Now, we openly acknowledge that not everybody is going to agree with every aspect of this direction of travel. And that's totally understood. But the important point is that the Trust is open to working this through properly, through collaboration and conversation, rather than trying to impose a single view. So for farmers, what this strategy could mean is a stronger focus on practical resilience. It means looking more closely at the opportunities on individual holdings, and it means thinking much more in terms of long-term outcomes than short-term fixes. Next slide, please. The strategy is not saying that farming sits on one side of nature recovery. It's in fact saying the total opposite. It's saying that nature-friendly farming is absolutely integral to it. Nature-friendly farming provides biodiversity, clean water, clean air, healthy food, and access to nature. And these aren't optional extras, they're fundamental needs for every generation. Now, we're also very aware that the current system has not always worked well from a farming perspective. Schemes and funding routes have often been slow and at times very difficult to access. What the strategy is trying to do is to recognise that and to respond to it. There is a clear opportunity in this work to support tenants to get on the front foot, particularly with opportunities like higher tier countryside stewardship, EWCO and FIPL. The nature and carbon process can also help think more broadly about these inputs. Next slide, please. One of the most useful pieces of work we've done in this space is the earlier development work with a supermarket. That project was deliberately set up to explore what carbon reduction and nature enhancement could look like in practice on real farms, working alongside tenant farmers with external specialist support. A big part of it was about listening properly to our farmers and getting honest feedback on what would actually work for them on the ground. The aim was to understand what is practical and what a more sustainable and workable support model might actually look like from a farming perspective. As that partnership has developed, our thinking has moved on. The shared vision is very clear. It's about producing farm systems in a way that supports nature, healthy food, and secures long-term livelihoods for farming families. It recognises that support for nature-friendly farming has to be ongoing, properly tailored, and responsive to individual farming business. So one of the strongest lessons from that work is this. This has to be built with farmers and not delivered to them. And I want to be clear about something that I know will be in people's mind. This process is not about carbon offsetting. We will need to watch these markets evolve and mature over time because they're still developing. But at the moment, I get the sense that the Woodland Carbon Code is the only really established framework in this space. So we're not building this around carbon markets. We're focusing on farms and land management decisions and practical outcomes on the ground. This work is about understanding farms properly, understanding where the opportunities lie, and supporting long-term resilience for the families on those farms. It's not about extracting value from the farming business for us. I'm now going to hand over to Richard, who will continue this presentation.
Thank you, Giles. So we're really interested in thinking about carbon in a different way. Being a nature conservation charity, we really want to make sure that we don't silo everything into a single approach. So we want to tackle or work with farmers to deliver a more sustainable farm business through nature mitigations rather than purely focusing on carbon. So the best way I can talk about this process or begin to explain how the process works is initially through a farm carbon sit down at a kitchen table with you as a family or with the farm as a family. And what I mean by that is a real understanding of how your farm system works. So we split the process into certain elements, and the first element is really important to give us a clear picture. What we want to do is work with you to understand what we're calling a farm synopsis. The farm synopsis is really to help us understand your history on the farm, what practices you're undertaking and delivering, what's changed over the duration of time while you've been on the farm or within your tenancy. We're then trying to understand how that business interacts with the land. So the land that you have, the habitats that are on that land, and what priorities there are within the farm system, which I'll talk about later. We also want to understand what previous engagement with environmental schemes you have done over the previous years, the business pressures, and where the opportunities may lie to really think about enhancement of farm business at a whole farm level. This way of working gives us a clearer picture across your business and where the pressures sit, and where there may be opportunities for both of us to think about where efficiencies can be had, particularly where to strengthen the natural assets on the farm or to work in a slightly different way that makes sense for you as a farmer. It's not that we're describing or prescribing a way of farming. It's a way for us to think about options. Internally, we try to build some structure around this. So normally, in terms of preparation, we'll do some information gathering. And again, I'll talk more in detail about that in a moment. And as part of this farm conversation, the synopsis is an integral part of the work. So this is not about data gathering. It is about holistic understanding of the whole farm. But the key point for me here is it's not an inspection. It absolutely isn't an inspection. It should feel like a real sit down and a useful conversation. Next slide, please. But I do think it's important to be honest. We have built this process as it's gone, and now it's becoming something that I feel is genuinely useful. For those farmers that were involved in the early stages, we were building this as we go. But what we are now seeing is something that's much more practical and much more useful. We're starting to bring more structure into this and really understanding how we can attach this to grant funding, and more importantly, how we can start to work with you to build a sustainable business. So that structure that we've built within the data collection and within the farm synopsis form two pillars of this work. The farm synopsis, as I say, is an understanding of the farming family. IFLP, or integrated farmland planning, is the process of trying to understand the ebbs and flows of what happen within your farm business. Next slide, please. So, what to expect? In practical terms, the visit should, hopefully, feel straightforward. It's a short, simple visit. We talk it through, we map it, and we send it back to you. We're not asking for records, we're not asking for invoices, we are not in any way undertaking an audit. The process is entirely declarative, and the important part, it's entirely voluntary. If you don't wish to be involved in this work, it is entirely a voluntary piece of work. I'm going to talk through now what we'll do. So in preparation, the farmer advisor, if you agree, would ask for the SPI number for your farm. This is really useful for us to help us understand some of the priorities to your farm and to your local area. And using that SPI number, your single business identifier, on a GIS tool called Land App, we can really then begin to think about what are the priority habitats in the area, what are the priorities for water, habitats, soil, woodland planting. This publicly sourced data is incredibly helpful for us to be able to think about your farm as a natural asset and the priorities that lie within your area. As I say, you do not have to supply the SPI, but what it really does is help us prepare. What it also helps us prepare is things like understanding what habitats you already have on farm. So measuring the hedgerows that you've got in preparation for the visit, understanding what tree canopy cover looks like, understanding what some of the habitats that you already have on farm are before we begin. What that does, it helps us come on farm with a series of maps, a map about habitats, a map about fields, a map about the hedgerows, which we'll sit down with you and check as we go through the process. The kitchen table is then effectively in three elements: complete and integrated farm and land planning form. This is the record of the enterprises, the land uses, habitats, livestock and inputs. So similar for those of you that have been involved in supply chain carbon contracts, but much simpler, a really simple declarative approach to what your farming system is. Review those maps and draw on those maps in any way that you want to think about things you might want to do in the future, or correct things that we've got incorrect as our approach goes forwards. And as I say, importantly in this approach, working with you to map in those things that you might want to do in the future, and then completing this farm synopsis. So this written record of your farming history, what your aspirations are on farm, and any of the things that we can't capture just in simple data. Really hope that it should take to a maximum of 2 hours, and I would hope for that 2 hours we would at least bring some biscuits at the very least. Once we finish the work, we hope to get back to you really quickly, the integrated farm land management plan and the farm synopsis, for you to have a read over, make sure we've not made any mistakes before we move forward. So we'll get that back to you within a few days, just to be confident that we've not made any mistakes there. If you wish to be engaged in recommendations, we then work on our recommendations map using Land App in an England context. This is to map those recommendations about grant funding that's available in England. So we tend to use SFI or CS high tier options to demonstrate some of the recommendations. It's a helpful approach, and fundamentally why we do that, the process of recording the farm synopsis and the process of using Land App, they are your two first points for a preparation of a CS high tier agreement. So whether working with us or not, the approach should put you in a position where you would be able to work directly with a Natural England advisor to put forward those recommendations, or work with ourselves if you felt that was possible. As I say, the information that we keep, it's important that we keep that securely. So any information that comes into ourselves is anonymized, and it is maintained securely. But it is your information, and at any point that you wish to have it back, you can ask for that information back and we'll remove it from our records. Next slide, please. So what are we looking at? It's that full review of the farm. We're really trying to focus on what a whole system looks like. For us, balancing nature and carbon is about thinking about the ebbs and flows, inputs and outputs of a farm, and how to really think about the natural assets you have on farm and how we can maximise those. So this means looking at the habitats, the soil, grassland, water, shelter, and what's available within the farm, and asking how it can be strengthened in a way that also supports nature and the business. As Giles said earlier, we are going through unusual times with weather, particularly with climate transition, and building in some of those mitigations for shade, shelter, water, we feel be really important in sustaining a farm business in the future. Our approach is to really work with the natural processes that are happening on your farm. So improving the productivity of habitats, thinking about nutrients cycling, supporting biodiversity, promoting those beneficial pest reservoirs in croplands for aphids, and avoiding damaging grazing. So we'll really talk to you about actually what is the availability of grazing on the farm to minimise the likelihood of erosion or runoff. Hopefully this will come across as a really simple process. We're trying to do the best for the natural asset while reducing reliance on bought-in inputs where we can. And hopefully that's where the practical elements will sit. So in simple terms, it's about finding the right opportunity in the right place and making it work for your farm. Next slide, please. So the more we understand about the farm and its system, the more useful we can be. One of the advantages of building a better picture through nature and carbon across farms is it gives a much stronger way of working with farmers in a practical sense. The process can really help, as I said earlier, make it easier to work through SFI, CS High Tier, SFS and UCO. We've designed this process in collaboration with DEFRA in particular and Natural England, so that we really do think about where the work we do can sit within an implementation plan for FIPL, for CS High Tier, for SFS, to minimise the need of repetition of work. But over time, it goes well beyond that, really. If we have a good understanding of where opportunities sit within the National Trust estate, it gives us a much better route for broader support. It helps us unlock wider and targeted funding, and it really helps us think pointing towards schemes that are beyond government. So, for example, if through this work we can see a consistent area for recommendation is coming through, for example, we may in these processes consider herbal leys to be a recommendation for nature, carbon and climate mitigation. We may look for opportunities through other sponsors and unlock other funding opportunities to target on this at both the regional and national level. So it's not just about understanding where a farm is, it's also about understanding where those opportunities are and where we can unlock them. Next slide, please. So I'll finish by coming back to the point that matters most, which is really, what is this meant to achieve? So let me reiterate, participation is voluntary. It's not an inspection. It's not compliance. It's not directly linked to any tenancy decisions. And importantly, the information you provide is secure and you can ask for it back whenever you wish to. So this only works if it stays collaborative and practical, and we really hope it will. That's our approach, that we collaborate with you and we keep it practical on farm. And I really hope that this way, that we can really work together and not see those trade-offs between farming and nature, but as trying to find a way where we can work together to deliver sustainable farm businesses and nature and carbon hand in hand. I hope this presentation has been useful. Please do ask questions.
Well, thank you to Giles and Richard for your presentations this evening. It's quite interesting that listening to what you were saying, how that people and relationships are at the centre of what you're trying to do, that profitability isn't a dirty word and it needs to be there to help to make the nature story work along. And it's very interesting also listening through to what you're doing, and I think it's very important that any benefit that comes to your estate, any financial benefit that is, should be shared between the landlords and the tenants. We're hearing so many cases across the country where landlords are taking the bulk of any financial benefit there. And it's also interesting to listen to there it's about the conversation rather than the inspection. And I think what we have seen over the last probably 3 years is the huge change between landlords and tenants, and regarding the relationships between the landlords and the tenants, and that can only be good if we're going to deliver the policies moving forwards. So as we move into our final part of this evening, and that's going to be the live question and answer, joining our speakers for this part of the evening, it will be George Dunn. George has been Chief Executive of the Tenant Farmers Association for nearly 30 years, bringing prior experience in the Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Food, and the Country Landowners Association. George is a member of the ROC Review Group onto agricultural tenancies, the Welsh Government Tenancy Working Group, and the Welsh Ministerial Roundtable on Sustainable Farming Schemes. George has been at the centre of agricultural tenancy policy for decades. In 2022, he received the Farmers Weekly Lifetime Achievement Award, followed by the British Farming Award for outstanding contribution to the agricultural industry in 2023, and an honorary doctorate of laws from Harper Adams University in 2024. I'd just like to remind everybody that's on our webinar this evening that to put all your questions into the question and answer panel at the bottom of the screen rather than in the chat area. And then as we move into the questions, then I can pull off the live questioning. Plus, we've had quite a number of questions have come in prior to this evening as well. So at least I'm able to mix and match. So if I can ask George to join us in, there you are. That's great. And I think we'll probably lead off with this question here, and this for you, Giles. The National Trust has come under some criticism for removing land from agriculture into tree planting and rewilding. However, in the recent 10-year strategy for the National Trust, there's been a commitment to work with farmers to deliver more for nature while producing good, healthy food and running sustainable businesses. The strategy also highlights that food production is part and parcel of a healthy natural environment. Is this an admission that some of your previous policies were misguided?
Thanks very much for that. I don't think it's the case that they were misguided. We announced our 20 million tree target back in 2020, in January 2020, actually, as it happens. And then everybody will remember what happened in March 2020, which COVID struck, and the world hasn't really been the same since. That was also the middle of a previous strategy period. And we're now in a new strategy period. And the last 6 years have given us good time to reflect. We've been endeavouring to plant trees on some of our land, and some of that's gone well and some of it has gone less well. There's absolutely no question about that. And we hopefully have learnt from our mistakes. But there is no question we're still absolutely committed to planting trees, more trees on National Trust land. And we believe that some of our land is absolutely suitable and should be used for tree planting. So we are being more precise about where we plant our trees. And I hope that you will have all heard from the presentation today that whilst trees and tree planting still forms a big part of our strategy, we're taking more of a natural processes approach where we take opportunities to plant trees where we can and where we think they may make the most sense. We're also looking at things like agroforestry, hedgerow trees, and shelter belts. So I think it's really just a refinement of our previous policy, which was a bit blunt, I think, probably 20 million trees. We now have to work out exactly how that would operate in practice.
Well, I think that's quite a concise answer to my question there, Giles. Thank you for that. I'm just kind of thinking aloud a little bit as we go along with these question and answers. We hear a lot where on the schemes that is involving, especially in the uplands, it's very much seen as reducing livestock units per hectare in favour of the schemes. And yet I think we're missing a bit of a trick here, because we've always had quite an economic way of producing protein on the hills from the sheep, and how the sheep are a very integral part, and even livestock, that they start in the uplands, the livestock works its way down to the lowlands. So what role do you see of livestock in the uplands and on some of your land to work within the aims of what you're trying to achieve?
So I think what I'm going to do is just ask Richard to come in first on that, then I'll follow, because he's been doing a lot of work on this particular area. So I think if Richard comes in first, then I'll follow up on that one.
Thanks, Robert. So we absolutely see livestock as being an integral part of the work that we're doing for nature and carbon. And of course, the way you explain that very often our farms will be, or the farms in the uplands will be producing store cattle or store lambs rather than finishing cattle, and they'll play a role in moving down to the lowlands. It's about working with those farms in the uplands as a process I've just talked through, really. We don't see ourselves destocking, but we do see ourselves working with farmers to really think about inputs and maximising the natural asset on the farm. So reducing those input costs and the use of inputs on farms, and maximising the occupancy of livestock on the farm, and maximising the potential of the asset. So it's a shift in thinking for us.
Now that's interesting, that, because I suppose I could bring George into this point, because I've seen the documents that come into the office on a regular basis from tenants in the uplands where they see destocking in relationship to signing up to schemes, and I think that's probably, I don't think I'm underplaying it, that's probably one of the major concerns, especially on the commons, George.
Yeah, Robert, and I know Giles wanted to come in, so I don't want him to accuse me of shutting him down.
Oh no, I'll bring him in next. Don't worry.
So that's fine. I mean, Giles will tell you that he and I often debate the extent to which the carrying capacity of National Trust holdings is being properly assessed in terms of what those can utilize in terms of cattle and sheep. And we tend to think that the National Trust are very conservative in their approach to stocking rates. We, however, think some of our members can be a little bit over enthusiastic with the number of stock that they want to put onto farms. So there needs to be a happy medium somewhere. And certainly when you look at the carbon-rich soils of our country, they're all grazed. They've got the carbon-rich soils of our country have got cattle and sheep on them at the moment, and those farmers are sequestering carbon every day of the week and storing carbon for the benefit of the nation every day of the week. And just going back to the first question, which I know I wasn't called on, but regularly we have members who will say to us they are concerned about the National Trust removing land from productive agricultural use into what they call rewilding, which may be a lower intensity use that Richard or Giles might talk about. And I know that that's something which happens at a local property level. It's not a national policy per se, but those are the concerns that our members have, that the land sharing aspect of the National Trust's work hasn't had perhaps the light shone on it that it should have done, and they see the National Trust taking more of a land sparing approach to the way in which it manages its land. But Giles, you'll probably shoot me down for all of that.
No, I won't, George. I mean, as you say, we've had some really healthy debates about stocking levels, and I think on the whole we either agree or we tend to disagree agreeably, and I think that's how it should be. Look, at the end of the day, we see, as Richard said, we see livestock as critical going forward to our work. We have many landlords' flocks with tens of thousands of sheep in them, so that is an integral part of what the trust does. But there is no question that I see, and some of my staff see, too many stock in some places, and that is a concern to us. And I think it is a legitimate concern. And Robert, you've rightly said that in some cases, if our tenants and your members wish to enter into certain agri-environment schemes, they're being required to reduce stocking numbers as a result of that. And that, of course, is a requirement of the scheme, not a requirement by us, the landlord. Of course, we would encourage people to go into those schemes. And I think the schemes are providing hugely valuable income going forward, and an income surety in an uncertain world. So I think all of this is us finding our way, and to find the right level of livestock in the right place. And obviously that will be a point of debate, but one that we want to enter into, as Richard has said throughout his presentation, in a collaborative and sensible way. And that's why we went into a partnership with a major supermarket to really look at how we could identify methods of reducing stocking numbers and increasing nature gain, but in a way that is adding value to the stock that is being produced. So this is work in progress, I would say.
And Robert, sorry to butt in again, but just on that point about the schemes, Giles, one of the concerns that we have as an organisation is that there is a standard stocking rate applied in the uplands, regardless of whether you're in Cumbria or in Dartmoor, that 0.16 livestock units per hectare, which cannot be the right answer everywhere. And we're hoping that DEFRA and naturally understands the need to flex that and finesse that a bit. And we would hope that the National Trust would join with us in that, so that there isn't just a blanket approach to this right across the country.
Yeah, at the end of the day, George, I want us to be guided by outcomes, and ultimately for us to agree what the outcomes for any piece of land is, and then to use the tools in order to deliver those outcomes. I totally agree. It's a very blunt tool to say it's this particular stocking rate. And I've been on several farms saying I have to have this number of stock. It's like, no, you don't. What we're looking for is the right outcomes. And that is going to vary depending on the type of stock you have and the type of land that you have. So that's what I would like to see happen, George.
Well, I suppose we'll head into some questions from some of our members this evening. A member in Devon said, how do I get my property manager interested in what I do on the farm? There seems to be both a lack of understanding and no engagement about what we do. Do you believe that would be a harsh criticism?
It's difficult to say whether it's harsh or not. I take it to be true, and that's a sadness to me to hear that. What I would encourage that member to do is to speak with their estate manager, who is their point of contact for their business relationship, and specifically ask and invite, and I'm sure they've done this, but through their estate manager to invite the general manager to come and visit their farm and to ensure that the estate manager understands that request and puts it in action and does not forget about it. So, I would wish to see our general managers engaging with our farm tenants. That is a necessary part of how we do business.
Well, I suppose that was part of my comments before there. It's about the relationship, about the conversation, and hopefully the conversation bears fruit. And that's the important thing. And they believe that the trustee is listening to what they are saying.
Indeed.
I suppose it kind of follows on to another one here. Talking about the environment management of our farm is important and all well and good, but what about the repairs I've been waiting for years? So how does someone hopefully try to get these repairs done if they don't feel they're being listened to?
Yeah, look, that is not an uncommon question to me, and some of our buildings are not in the condition that I would wish them to be in. There is no question about that. The costs of maintaining our estate have gone up dramatically since 2020. So, for example, £100,000 worth of building work in 2020 now costs us well over £150,000. Now, that is our problem, and I totally understand that. I'm not laying that onto anybody else, but it does mean our budgets go less far. And so us prioritizing where we put our money is really important. And I totally understand the frustration that people will undoubtedly feel when they feel that repairs are not being done to their farms and they're paying their rent on time and in a way that we have asked them to, and their repairs not being done. So I would urge that they continue really good dialogues with their estate managers, and we try and come up with a realistic schedule of repairs to their farm.
George, you like to come in at this point, please?
Okay, and apologies to Richard. We don't want this just to be a bout between
I'm coming back to Richard in a minute. Don't worry.
And Giles. What I would say is, when Richard came to us originally to talk about the way in which the National Trust wanted to address these issues in the round, I said to Giles, if Richard could be sent up every farm track in the country, I'm sure we would get a lot of traction for the sort of stuff that you want to talk about and you want to do. But obviously, Richard's going to face some difficulty when you go onto a holding where there is a lack of repair. And I think, Giles, you get that. Richard, you get that too. And you can't have a conversation with a tenant about carbon when the rain's coming through the roof in a building that hasn't been repaired for donkey's years. So, I think the stuff that Richard's been presenting tonight and the stuff that he has presented to us is to our mind really exciting, and it will provide a better framework within which the relationships between tenants and the National Trust will thrive. But my plea is, do not let that be impacted negatively by the lack of action on the rest of the estate. We need excellence in the stuff that Richard is doing, and I think it is excellent. But we need excellence elsewhere on the National Trust estate to back that up.
I understand that.
Yeah, well, I suppose I can come on a thing for Richard here, and we're talking a little bit about carbon. How does the National Trust square its concern for carbon in terms of land management with its huge visitor experience with many members of the National Trust and others travelling to properties by car?
Thanks for that one, Robert.
No problem.
It's a fair challenge. And in the same way, we're beginning to look at our own goods and services and how we operate as an organisation. We're also looking at that for our members as well. So we're not attempting to be slopey shoulders in terms of where we are as a business. As part of the new strategy, you'll have heard Giles say earlier that people are a big part of our new strategy. So we are really working on things like incentivizing members of the public to cycle to our properties. There are various trial programs across the UK where we're doing that work. We're working with partner organisations to make sure that we've got public transport involved, and on our sites themselves, we've included across all sites now, I think, e-charging facilities for electric cars. It is something over the next 10 years we are really going to have to work hard on, because clearly we are a visitor business and they are integral to what we do. But yeah, really working closely on how we can diversify how people get to the properties we see as a main part of the solution.
It's interesting you mentioned cycling there, but the vast majority of your sites are in the middle of nowhere, because that's where they were bought and they were looked after and what have you. So it's interesting what you're saying there. I suppose if we go to questions online here, and this is probably a little bugbear for me, and I've mentioned it regarding destocking a little bit. Nature-friendly farming generally means more extensive farming. Extensive farming, according to ABC data, means less food production and less profits. Are the trust minded to reduce the rents in these scenarios? Because if someone can't get into a scheme to offset the reduction in the livestock units and also the profitability, I take it there must be a conversation there, Giles, going forwards.
Yes, Rob. So what I'd like to do with this one is I'd like Richard to handle the first part of it, and then I will deal with the rental side of it. So Richard, do you want to do the extensive element of this, please?
Yes. And this won't be an answer for all farms, Robert, but the work we've been doing with nature and carbon, and I may try and answer another of the questions that are in the chat as part of this. In an England context, we really have worked closely with DEFRA and Natural England on the nature and carbon work, and also work that I'm sure that many of your members will be aware of, work with Chris Clark as part of Maximum Sustainable Occupancy. And we really do think that the answer for us is and for many of our tenant farmers in upland type situations, it is finding that sweet spot in terms of extensifying to the point where we can really reduce those inputs and maximising what's available in the natural asset grant funding. We do think the work that we've done with Natural England and DEFRA does put us in a good position to open the door to CS Height here. We've had great successes with this work already of bringing people straight to invite to apply as part of this, because it is a piece of work that does all of that design and build to take you to an element of invite to apply. So there is something for us about finding that sweet spot in a farm business that helps us as an organisation meet some of the challenges that we have for biodiversity failure and for climate mitigation and for climate transition, but also finding that sweet spot in the middle where we hopefully can work with you to build a sustainable farming business. We have gone through a volatile time of SFI windows opening and closing and reopening, just as we'll have seen today, the SFI 26 framework has come out today. But we really do hope that this approach of really thinking about how you can maximise natural asset potential and the highest value schemes will address some of that. I'll let Giles finish the...
Yeah, so on rents, I would like to think that we are fair on our rents. You know, the average rent across all of our holding, if you took our total agricultural rent roll divided by the number of acres that we let, is around about £30 an acre. And we also, look very carefully at the income generating opportunities of the whole holding. So I absolutely take your point, Robert, about if somebody goes more extensive, but the likelihood is they've gone more extensive and they would be supported by a scheme in order to do that. And so we would want to see what that scheme is generating, and therefore look at the income that the whole farm is generating. And unlike some other landlords who take very significant percentages of stewardship income, we don't look at it like that. And there are many examples where tenants are keeping very significant proportions of their stewardship because we believe very firmly that is the right thing to be doing in those circumstances, because the delivery of that nature benefit is the real win for the organisation.
George, would you like to come in at this point as well, please?
Just to comment on this issue about extensification, and I think what we all need to be focused on here is margin and profit. And I understand, high input, high output could produce a low margin, low input, low output could produce a higher margin. So we need just to be careful that we're not just talking about turnover here. We need to be looking at margin, and both sides of the table need to be looking at that, the National Trust and the tenant farmer. But one of and Giles will be surprised when I raise this again, but one of the things I've said to Giles and the National Trust more generally is, if you are truly so concerned about the natural capital issues, the environmental issues, the historic environment, the grazing pressure, the carbon and all of that, if that's where your return really is from your strategy, and the rent is a sort of sideshow, and it's great to have that comparable, Giles, 30 quid an acre, I'll have that in my head now.
On average, George, on average.
but if the rent, if the rent is not as important as those other things, then particularly when you're offering farms, why don't you just set the level of rent and say, this is what we want you to do in terms of natural capital, and we want X amount in rent because that's what we think is sustainable. And I know in the second series of Our Dream Farm, you put in a guide price for that rent or for that holding in Wales. And surprise, surprise, everybody tendered around that guide, did they not? But it takes the competitive edge out of it and ensures that people are focusing on the right thing if you were to say, we want this for the rent, rather than you asking people to tender a figure.
I do absolutely understand that, George, and you and I have had some great debates around this. And the Our Dream Farm second series was a real case in point on that, with a 15-year tenancy and giving that very clear guide as to what we felt was a sensible, reasonable, and proportionate rent for the holding. And I think we probably will see more of that going forward. But it does. I suppose the interesting element here is, I've never let a farm to anybody who's offered the highest amount. I haven't. Some of my colleagues may have done, but I personally have not. That is not what has generally floated our boat. And what we try and do when we're letting a farm is, within the particulars, we're setting out what it is that we want, and then asking the experts to say, well, how are you going to deliver that? And if you are going to deliver that, what do you think would be a reasonable rent to be paying in return for this opportunity? And I take your point about the guide, George, but in a way, I also don't want to stifle innovation and entrepreneurship, because a prospective tenant may well come up with something that we have not thought about. And if they were to implement it, they simply couldn't afford the rent that we had originally thought was most appropriate for that holding. And I wouldn't want to to stop somebody from applying, thinking, well, if I can't pay that rent, then there's no point in me even applying for the farm. So I think there's definitely work that we can do. I take that point on board, but equally, I don't want to straitjacket ourselves or prevent future people from applying because they think that that's not something they can do in return for what we're offering.
Well, I think that's quite interesting to hear what you're saying there, actually. I suppose I want to move on to a question from a member in Cumbria. What is the National Trust position on landscape recovery schemes?
So, Richard, do you want to start with this one?
Yep, very happy to. So for those of you that may or may not know, we are involved in 5 landscape recovery schemes within round 1 and round 2, in a variety of landscapes from the southwest. I think our most northerly is in the northern lakes of the Lake District. We are currently working through those pilots and working through those implementation plans. And it's fair to say landscape recovery, we feel, holds an awful lot of answers in terms of the next generation of support. As I think you've probably heard through a lot of what Giles and I have said today, a lot of that has used the word collaborate, and those landscape recovery schemes are all about people working together, whether that's groups of farmers in a landscape or working with us as an organisation. So we really do think that there's mileage in landscape recovery, and we are putting an awful lot of time and effort into delivering those implementation plans for round 1 and round 2. I noticed in the chat there's a question about Hillary Cottam. Probably not close enough to the 19 insights to answer that today, but we do see that some of that is evolving into collaborate projects as well. So absolutely, this approach of taking landscape scale thinking, but whilst working with farmers in a landscape, it's what we're all about, really, as an organisation.
Yeah, to sort of build on that, it's a key plank. There is no question about that in our strategy to deliver more nature across our land. However, they are fearfully complicated. I was speaking to somebody who's involved in a landscape recovery scheme that is nothing to do with the National Trust, and they've already spent £100,000 on legal fees trying to get a workable agreement between them and DEFRA and the many partners that are involved in that scheme. And that's just one example. So the complications in this and the amount of professional advice that everybody who is involved in them will need before entering them is a challenge. There's no question, but we think there's a good prize there for everybody, and it's worth us persevering with this. However, it is just one element, and I think the whole range of elms, and I understand the point about SFI, but the whole range of elms needs to be utilised, and the majority of our tenants will be using other elements of agricultural and environmental support rather than landscape recovery, I think, in the years to come. So we need to make sure that our organisational focus is proportionate to the types of schemes that the majority of our tenants and partners are wanting to enter into.
George, can I ask you a comment on this as well, please?
Yeah, Robert, I know you're up against the clock, and we've only probably dealt with about 5% of the questions tonight. There's been so many. But just on that landscape recovery point, we in the Tenant Farmers Association are in a bit of an unusual position, because we get members who call us to say they don't feel involved in schemes where the National Trust are involved, and they feel that they've been shoved and cajoled and in some respects, I use this word advisedly, bullied into being involved in those schemes. But in other schemes, we have members who think they're delighted with how engaged the National Trust is and how the process is going, and want things to move quicker than the scheme administration is allowing. And I think it's about this point of consistency, and what I said earlier. If Richard could go a very farm drive and present what he's presented tonight to everybody, we wouldn't have an issue. And we just need the National Trust to be consistent, whether you are in Cumbria or Devon or in the Peaks, to ensure that there is that collegiate approach, which doesn't always happen in every place.
Well, as ever, George, as you alluded to, the time has run away from us again tonight, and we've had numerous questions which haven't been answered, and we'll look to hopefully forward them to Giles and Richard to hopefully come back to us with some answers on that. So, without further ado, I'd like to thank Giles Hunt, Richard Wheeldon, and George Dunn for an excellent evening, and to Royce Thorne's solicitors for their sponsorship. We are delighted to share that we have managed to secure an alternative date for our virtual event with the Farming Minister, Dame Angela Eagle. So if you'd like to join us on Tuesday, the 30th of June, to hear her views on UK agriculture, this will be a brilliant opportunity that you won't want to miss. It's always, as always, it's free to attend, starts at 7 o'clock. Runs for an hour, includes question and answers, so please register at TFA events at tfa.org.uk. We hope that you found this a useful webinar. Thank you for attending, and we hope that you will join us again soon.